Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Happily Never After show. I'm your host, Kate Mollison, and we have a pretty incredible guest this week. I'm really excited to have her with us. She offers the perspective of what it's like to lose your parent when you're the child and watching her parent go through the widowhood experience. So, welcome to Sovanarath. Please tell me I said that correctly.
Yes, thank you for having me. My name is Sovanarath, and thanks for the quick intro as well. My dad actually passed away when I was around 4 years old. And so my mom, just kind of went through the whole process and fortunately and unfortunately got remarried, but then also divorced. And so I've went through a lot of different things growing up, given that exposure at such a young age.
Yeah, and I know when we talked previously, a lot of your experience made me think about my daughter. So she's 5 years old now, and she was 19 months old when her dad passed away. And it's really interesting to almost time jump, right? To get to meet you and talk to you and see what your experiences are like and how you've adjusted as an adult. So I think about it as a widow, what it's like, because we don't want to cause trauma to our children, and we always worry about the relationships we have when we, as the grieving, experience that loss. What was it like for you watching your mom go through that tragic experience at such a young age?
I remember being at the funeral, and she was crying, obviously. I asked her why she was crying because I couldn't process any of that at that age. And she said, "One day you'll understand." And I think that was the only discussion we've ever had, about my dad at the time. And I think, looking back, I don't think we've ever talked about him. I don't think she was ever comfortable in opening up. There were certain things that she kept away from me. I would say my mom is a pretty close book. Therefore, I just knew at such a young age to, you know, I saw how hurtful it was for her. And I think for me, I just stay, in a way, I was trying to protect her as well. So growing up, I just, tried to eliminate any sort of issues for her to deal with, any difficulties. I just kind of took that upon myself and try to deal
Mm.
with it personally. So held on a lot of pain in myself, and not until recently where we finally talked about my dad and how they met and what she had to deal with through that whole experience for herself as well. I think our relationship was never the best because of that. I think she sheltered me as much as I try to shelter her. So I would say, we lost each other a little bit for a little bit, and I think right now we're still in the process of growing our relationship.
I hear some really powerful things, right? Like you said, that you tried to protect her. And I think that there's something to be said about that. Like, I know my older child, my son, who's a teenager now, he definitely has exhibited signs of trying to take on that role of caregiver. It must have been really hard and challenging for you to watch your mom go through something so difficult, but it also sounds like she wasn't there in the way that you needed her to be. And no criticism on her, obviously. But I wonder, how do you think that affected you as you became an adult to have that divergence in relationship?
hmm Yeah, I would say I struggle a lot with making friends. My mom remarried when I was 7. Not only did I struggle having a close relationship with my mom, I struggle with outsiders. And
Mm.
particularly, I feel like I couldn't really, we all have tempers and we have sometimes way more bad tempers than others, but I would say that I do tend to lash out on other people because I learn how to hold so much in and not have anyone to talk to. And so at any moment, anyone that have hurt me or may have made mistakes on, accidentally made mistakes towards
Mm.
me, I just kind of took that out on them. And I struggled for a long time just making friends and, having positive relationships, and also kind of reflected onto, my relationships for a while until I met my husband now. But I would say I had to play that mom role for myself, and for my mom, and not only that, for my brother when my mom remarried. I have a brother who's 7 years younger, and For as long as I could remember, my mom taught me to take care of him. And I struggle, not being able to have someone to guide you as a parent and then having to step up as your own parent. And not only that, having to step up as somebody else's parent, my
Mm.
brother's parent. So it was a lot on my plate. And I think that, I would never recommend any of that to anyone, but it's something that you internalize without talking to anybody else. But then when you're that young, you don't know what to talk about. You don't know what you're dealing with.
Mm.
So it was a strange thing of me going through it all and then now realizing so and trying to kind of foster that positive relationship with the people that I love.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty intense. So it sounds like there was some loss of connection to the outside world, almost like living in this little bubble or this vacuum where you could see everyone around you interacting and doing things. But given the loss within your immediate family, there was a lot of role shifts and paradigm shifts, and you took on responsibility maybe before you were ready or should have. And
Hmm.
it's a hard thing to navigate, and honestly it's a hard thing to hear because it makes me think about and reflect on the last 3 years of my life, and I go, oh God, have I put my children in a situation where they've had to be parentified? We
Mm.
never want to do that to our children intentionally or consciously, and I think about how authentic and transparent I was with the grief, with the rawness in that moment. um, was it hard to watch your mom grieve like that, or was it so far removed from your understanding at that point?
It was far from my understanding, but really hard to see her because I think that I had such a great relationship with her. So I naturally love fashion, and the way I play with fashion is, wearing colors all the time. And I would see my mom doing that because I saw her do so. And in between when she lost her first husband and then remarrying the second husband, I think she kind of lost that, she lost herself. I found her wearing just plain colors, and our relationship just started to fall apart further and further out. And she didn't talk much about anything. She didn't talk to me. She didn't, you know, in a way, she sheltered me. In her head, she thinks that she's sheltering me, but I think that I would have appreciated just additional context, so that because not only did she lose her husband, but I lost my dad too.
Mm.
And, even though she wasn't ready to talk about it, I think I would have appreciated some sort of guidance and just a little bit more of conversations, like how you mentioned that you were very transparent with your kids. And I think that sometimes, we try to be so strong, but then when we are so strong, we then lose ourselves. We don't show enough
Mm.
vulnerability. And I think showing vulnerability, allowing other people to understand you a lot more. And then also from that, you can say, okay, I understand you. I may never ever be in the same shoe as you, but I can try to help you and relate to whatever you're going through and how can I help you at the same time. So because she was so closed off, I didn't know how to help her, nor did I know how to help myself, and we just kept
Mm.
falling apart.
Driving further and further away from each other because it was just that inability to connect over a commonality.
Hmm.
That's really powerful. So then you said your mom remarried after a couple of years. What was that like? Was there resentment or animosity in watching your mom pursue additional romantic relationships? And how did that change your relationship with your mom and with your dad? Even though he had passed away, there's still a relationship there.
Yeah. So I would say, luckily, when I was that young, my stepdad was always around, and since I was young, and I think that for that reason, I never looked at him as a step or anything like that. I just looked at him as a father figure altogether. And, we did have a great relationship. Growing up, we did a lot of things, and he was very successful. He did great for himself. But because my mom wasn't there for herself, I don't think she was also there for me or him. And, she then got pregnant with my brother. And in our Asian culture, men are, treated and looked at as the gods. I mean, in a way, I know
Mm.
not gods, but I don't want to use religions as,
There's a hierarchy, right?
yeah, right.
Culturally.
Exactly. So they're brought up, all women are brought up to obey and, just cook and clean as if
To
They're
take care of
nothing.
their husband and the house and the children. It was a
Exactly.
very, quote, traditional,
Very
dynamic.
traditional. Yeah. And so, um, my mom, she had this daughter, and now all of a sudden she has a son whose husband's still around, who's more successful than the previous marriage. And, I think in a way she shifted that love towards him a lot more than what she had for me. And I think that there were a lot of things she didn't realize she would comment and make statements about that would hurt my feelings. And even at that age, I remember trying to talk to her about it, and she couldn't understand. I think there were a lot of differences between the culture, and then, the only thing that she would say to me would be, "You're a girl, so you should do that." And that was what I grew up with. And I grew up very, you know, if outsiders would look at me and say, "You're very difficult to deal with. Your daughter is very difficult. Your son isn't. Your son is so much easier to deal with and take care of." And these were, statements that she would repeat back to me, relaying to
Mm.
me. And I think that I think what she was trying to do is make me understand her, but I think the way that she approached it was a lot more harsh. And in return, I ended up being rebellious. I became very rebellious towards anything and everything that she was speaking to me.
Wow. Yeah. And again, that's a lot for you to handle and go through. Forgive me if this is an inappropriate question, but I wonder, do you think that your mom, quote, shifted some of that attention because you served as a reminder of her late husband? Do you think that that was maybe a difficulty for her?
You know what? I actually just thought about that recently. And as hard as it is, I think it may be true. I think it may be, I will never know, and I don't think she'll ever admit to it. I think that it is still really hard, and I understand, losing someone you love, and then having someone there, um, as a reminder constantly, maybe. But in a way, I do think that that was her resenting me and what had happened to
Mm.
her. I don't think that it was right, but I don't think she also knew how to deal with it. And instead of seeking professional help, she kind of, I wouldn't necessarily take it out on me, but I don't think it was almost slightly an abandonment. It was more of,
Mm.
I love you, but I need to do more stuff. I need to
Like it
do
was too
these.
painful, maybe. And it doesn't
Yeah.
sound like it was necessarily intentional. Like
Hmm.
even there's, I don't think, forgive me for assuming, but that she even has an awareness that that's how that manifested. But that must have contributed towards that wanting to rebel and push back because it sounds like there was cultural pressures and interfamily dynamic pressures and gender pressures, and then you throw in the trauma of losing a spouse as the parent and how that trickles down to how you parent. It kind of was the perfect storm for you to fall through the cracks in a way. But
Hmm.
here you are in front of me, very,
Yeah.
put together and intelligent and well spoken and successful. So, how did you find the wherewithal to pull yourself up and persevere?
I would say I have to admit I've struggled for the longest, in trying to identify myself. Self-identity was something I struggle with. Confidence was something I struggle with. And trust. I would say that those were three things that I really struggle with. And I think for me, what, you know, so without going into too much detail with this, but I lost my oldest cousin who was there for me. I didn't have anybody else but my cousin who was the oldest, and I lost him. And I remember at that point, I started to seek therapy, professional help. And the first thing, after seeing my therapist for a while, and sharing my stories with her, she asked me and she said, "Can I just tell you something? And please don't take it the wrong way. I just want you to know that what you're telling me is you asking for approval from your mom. You're literally seeking approval from your family. And
Mm.
I just want you to know that your family doesn't know what that is. They don't even know it for themselves. And they will never give that to you because they don't know it. And if you're going to continue living your life seeking approval from your family, you will never go anywhere. You will never be successful. You're always going to stuck seeking. So that's a decision you have to make, whether to stop or to, to continue to move on. Um, but I just want to give you real and honest advice. And I think I took that advice literally and thought about the whole situation. And that's what it was. I think in the culture that I grew up in, it was more of, you know, you're this, you're my kid and I'm taking care of you. And now that you're old enough, you're going to take care of me in return
Mm.
because you can afford so. And that's always been the culture. It's a cycle that they constantly repeat. And what I've noticed in that is, there's no success. I think that when you're teaching kids to keep them in a box, they're not being creative enough. They're not strategizing their lifestyles. I saw that very early on with my other cousins, my extended family members, and I didn't want to be another one of them. And, no offense to them, I think that's their lifestyle that they choose to live in. And maybe they are dealing with certain things that I've dealt with too, and, unable to kind of overcome it. But for me, I just had to tell myself I cannot live the way that they live. And that was when I said, well, what do I need to do? I need to make a plan that will um, allow me to get out and just explore the world, explore other lifestyles. And from there, I just took actions and, I failed a few times too. However, I just kind of went on with my gut and here I am, I'm with a husband who's successful himself, but also very uplifting. I can
Mm.
vent to him. And even though coming from a culture where I was taught to cook and clean in the kitchen for the most part and not go out the house, my husband actually cooks. He does the cooking. And so these are things that I've learned. I made a list of what I wanted to do, the pros and cons. And I just kind of pulled out what I really wanted to focus on and just kept focusing on that.
I love that. And so it would have been very easy for you to fall into that similar cycle of behavior, even with it, being presented to you for that just cultural identity and gender identity to take over and be more driving. But it's funny that grief really makes us fearless in a way, right? How we
Yeah.
have these experiences and then we go, well, I have nothing left to lose, so might as well jump out of an airplane kind of situation.
Yeah.
So you really alchemized your trauma and your experiences because losing your dad wasn't the only trauma that you went through. You went through the trauma of watching your mom lose herself, and then briefly we've talked about you immigrating, and then your stepdad immigrating, and the relationship with your brother, and so it's just this onslaught of things that were working against you, and you really took them as fuel to become well and healthy, and so you should be really proud of yourself. I'm proud of you. I think that's awesome.
I think I just wanted to say that the word you chose there, fearless, is a really great word because exactly that, like they always said, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger. And I think if you are constantly focusing on victimizing yourself, you're always going to be a victim. Now, it's
Mm.
about learning how to anybody and everybody can be a victim, but how do you lead? How do you go out there and lead and not only lead, but lead effectively? And that's what you need to focus on is leading your own life. I like to say, everybody's out here, they're all writing a book. I am in control of writing my own book and writing my own chapters. I'm not going to allow anyone else to kind of write that for me. So that would be kind of a motivational, piece of
I think that's
um,
awesome. Yeah, I think I was going to ask you if you could give advice to the listeners for the children of a widow or widower. What advice would you give those kids?
mm, very great question. I would say focus on yourself. I know it sounds easy and cliche to say, but really focusing on yourself, knowing that you're enough. And I think often for me, because I didn't get any validation, I still don't. I don't have any validation or approval from my family. Um, you know, I think that when you're able to trust yourself, focus on yourself, understand your actions, build a plan for yourself, you can really go far. There are going to be outside noise, right? Just focus on that. If your parent, if your parent's not there for you, you have to be there for yourself. And as hard as
Mm.
that is, you do have to step up and say, you know what, once again, going back to that mentality of victimizing yourself, they're a victim too, unfortunately. They
Mm.
are a victim. They're still dealing with it. The way that they're dealing with it is probably the way that they were somewhat taught, or something that they went through and allowed them to, came up with this idea of this is how I'm going to approach it. And this is whether it's good or bad, you just have to once again focus on yourself, be confident, continue to build those trusting relationships. And if there's a time where you feel like you need to seek professional therapy, do so. Don't ever feel embarrassed. Don't ever feel like, it's not within your culture, because I know that was something within my culture too. It was against our culture, it was against our religion to seek therapy. And I did it despite all of the odds and all of the opinions that were placed on me, In a way, they looked at me as I had mental issues. That was,
Mm.
that's another topic where, oh, you're so different and you're rebellious and you just have mental issues. But in reality, I just needed other, a very unbiased opinion so I could make a genuine opinion and plans for myself to move forward.
Yeah. And it's really powerful that you continued to move with intention and move against the current of your given situation. So I think that it's really commendable. And I think that there's lots of value to be taken from what you've said. What advice would you give the adult, the widow or the widower who has these children, whether they be young or teenagers? If you could go back and tell your mom how to do something differently for your benefit, what would you say?
I would say focus on building trust and fostering that positive relationship. Um, Building confidence. I would say that I wish my mom would have talked to me a lot more. I think she shut down. She didn't talk a lot. And she even went out to say that she didn't know how to talk because, she was the youngest in her family as well. So I think there were certain things she was dealing with her own demons, and she
Mm.
unfortunately couldn't be there. She couldn't be present for me. So I think if you can be if you're the parent, if you can be there present, whether you're struggling with it or not, just be present and try to be as present as possible, talk things out, whether you are trying to shelter the kids or not. I think that if you're able to allow the kids to know how you feel, and maybe you can identify certain solutions that they can also help you cope with it. And those are things that I wish my mom would have done, because she just sheltered me, and to a point where we couldn't talk anymore. We couldn't bond with anything. We go to dinner and we sit there quietly, and
Ooh.
you don't want that. You just don't want that divided attention. You want to be able to, be there. Her love language is a little bit different. Like, once again, going back to the culture. So the way she thinks that she's done her job is by taking care of me. I have a house, I have a shelter under my head, you know, um, she was able to cook 3 meals a day. So those were her ways of validating that she was a great mom. But there were other things where I feel like now that I'm older and I'm getting ready to, prepare to have a family myself, I realize there's so much more than that. And this is the emotional aspect. Of course, there's a financial aspect of it, but the emotional aspect, I believe, is more important.
That nurturing, cultivated family environment, which is sometimes so hard to do when you're in the throes of grief, right? And I think just bringing that awareness to the widows and the widowers who are out there going through it, to just have them slow down, right? Hit the pause
Mhm.
button and reassess. Like it's okay if that's how people have been moving
Mhm.
currently, but to hear this and pause and say, okay, am I as connected as I could be, as much as it hurts? Am I as transparent as I could be, even though it hurts?
Mhm.
Or I'm worried about inflicting trauma, or it's not appropriate to show kids that much emotion or that much sadness. We as parents want nothing more than to protect our kids from hurt and from pain and from trauma. But I think we do a disservice by doing that. And it doesn't mean that they get carte blanche, access to
Mhm.
everything that happened, but a little transparency sounds like it goes like a long way. So I love that perspective. And I think that it's really something that shifted my perspective. I think about like, oh, okay, I was worried that I was showing my kids too much. And now I'm like, maybe I didn't show them enough sometimes, and really hitting that pause button and cultivating those dedicated family times. Um, and your mom worked too, right? So it's not like there was that work life balance for her where she was home and able to have those scheduled opportunities. It was all very much dependent on her time at home and then her bandwidth for it too, right?
Hmm. Yeah, she worked. Looking back now, I don't think we ever talked much. When it comes to parenting, I think she kind of allowed, because she lost her significant other, she allowed her older siblings and outside noise to kind of parent me. And I think
Mm.
this is where I say the emotional aspect is so important because I look back and even in my own country and third world countries, and I travel a lot too. So going to these countries where kids have nothing, but they're so happy, they're running around, they're laughing, and same thing with adults, they barely have anything, but they're just happy. And I ask myself, why? Why are they happy? And I have everything. I live in a beautiful home. I have, all the high advanced technology, whatever. And I'm still asking myself, and I'm still sad these days. Of course, you go through those days and you ask yourself why, and, what's your why, and why do you feel this way, and all of that. But I realize it's because I lack that emotional aspect, the connection with my family, with my mom.
Mm.
I'm like, well, okay, if I didn't have that with my mom, I'm going to strive to have love somewhere else. Is that going to be my job? So I poured all my effort into something that I feel like was going to be in return for me. It was going to be beneficial. So you start to seek this love anywhere with anyone. And I think if you're not careful, unfortunately, you may fall down the wrong path, which is why I think that emotional aspect and building that trusting relationship is so important because you want to provide enough context and be transparent enough where they understand what you're going through, and if there's any possibility that they can help you with it, they will come to you, and you want them to come to you. You want them to be independent, but also enough to say, hey mom, hey dad, I'm going through this. Can you help me? Can you give me some advice? You want them to call you. You don't want them to always ask you to do the work for them.
Yeah, that's really powerful too, especially having a teenager. I think about I've always wanted to cultivate and foster that open door policy environment at home. And sometimes I struggle with it and I wonder and worry what isn't working. And it may be grief that's standing in the way. And so that's very much an eye opening perspective shift for me. And it's really powerful the way you talk about alchemizing your experience and overcoming that adversity. Do you think that your experience would still be similar if you were still in Cambodia, or do you think culturally it has to do with where you are geographically?
I would say if I were to live in Cambodia, it would be a 50-50. That's a very hard question to answer because I know that even though Cambodia is a lot more advanced than when I was there, however, I do still think that there's that gender bias set between men and women.
Mm.
I know that a lot more women are educated or allowed to go to school. So I think hopefully that they are more open-minded to look into, dating outside. And um, I just know that it's just different. I would say I may fall into the same cycle. I may fall into that cycle of, well, victimizing, right?
Mm.
Um, I may consider myself a victim and just kind of accept the norm and, follow the society and what the society and the trends have set for me. If I were to live in a country that didn't allow the freedom of speech, didn't allow, for me to go out there and get education. And because of the openness and the exposure, now, I wanted that too, because even though I lived in America, my mom was very strict. She had a curfew for me. I mean, it was right after school, 4 or 5 p.m. I had to be home. But I was rebellious and I said I wanted to play volleyball. I wanted to go out. I wanted to do after school programs. And I did so. I just had to, I had to get out
Mm.
there. And but it was also because I was in an environment that I felt like safe enough to go and do so. So if
Yeah.
I would have been in Cambodia, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. It may have shifted my perspective and kind of followed the norm because it's harder out there, you know, there
Yeah.
aren't many resources.
And I think it potentially would have put you in a situation where you wouldn't have had that capacity to alchemize your grief, to have that, forged in fire type situation.
Hmm.
So, there's pros and cons to every situation. We are coming up about on the end of our time together today. I wanted to offer the opportunity for you to share anything that you have going on, anything you want to shout out or talk about. What's going on in your world?
Oh my gosh, so much is happening in my world. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of share my experience here. I'm very fortunate and to have met you. And I just wanted to say thank you and also to give me a different perspective from my mom's perspective. And, you know, there are certain things that you've shared with me too that I definitely appreciate. And I was actually just sharing that with my family, and they appreciate it and they can't wait to hear the podcast.
Oh,
Yeah, I you know, right now I'm just in the process of reflecting a lot and in the process of possibly building my own family. And there's just a lot that I'm learning through this and through speaking with you. And I just hope that you continue this journey and you know, the best for you and your family as well.
well, thank you so much. I am so grateful to have met you and have had this shared perspective. I always say the people that I connect with, I'm friends with them as long as they want to have me. So you're stuck with me. And I think that you'll make a great mom. I think that doing a lot of the soul searching and the mental health legwork that you've done has really put you in a unique perspective to bring a new generation of thinkers and feelers into the world. So I'm so excited for you and your family and wish you all the blessings and success. And I just want to thank you for your time and your transparency. It's not easy to talk about these kinds of things. So thank you for sharing with my listeners the other side of the coin, the perspective of being the adult child. And I want to say thank you to all my listeners out there. We can be found on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, and all of your favorite streaming platforms. Again, this is the Happily Never After show. And until next time, we'll see you again.
You've been listening to Happily Never After, part of the Exvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Happily Never After, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.